everyone, I'm Professor Casey, and this is quick review 1 for tolerance stack analysis. I'm going to go through part of an example with you, and then I'll leave the rest of the in-class practice problem for you guys to do at home. But I want to get you set up, started, make sure you're on the right path as we work through this example. Let's get started. Okay, this is the tolerance stack example problem. I'm going to walk through part A with you, and then you'll be able to do part B from there. It's slightly more challenging, but you'll have the process down. Okay, so our task for part A is for gap 1, which is labeled G1 right here. We need to find the loop equation, the mean gap value, the gap tolerance, the minimum gap, and the maximum gap. All right, so let's remember the steps that we have to walk through. The first thing we need to identify is what we're looking at, our key characteristic. Well, we know our key characteristic, because we've already said what it is this G1 right here, gap 1. Okay, what's the next thing we have to do? We have to make a loop diagram or a loop equation. So if you remember, how do we make a loop diagram? Well, let's look down here at our diagram here. So we need to find a way to go from one point back to the same point, right? From 0 to 0, going through G1. Okay, so let's look at this. I need to pick my 0. I'm gonna pick right here because that just seems to make sense. And then I'm gonna start going up through A. And let's just see how far I get. So I'm gonna go up A, I'm gonna go up B, C, D, E. Now this takes me through G1. I don't have to really go up anymore, and conveniently, if I go and look over here, that whole length I just traveled is M. So that is my gap or my loop diagram for gap 1. Now I need to be able to make that into a loop equation, right? Which is also part of step 2. So if I do that, I'm gonna say, okay, 0 equals A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus G1, that's our gap, minus M. Okay, and that gets me to 0. And then I can rearrange this to solve for G1. So that's what I'm going to do here. Okay, and if you wrote this as M minus E minus D minus B minus C, that's fine too. I just like how this looks better. Okay, so now I have my loop equation. My next step, before I even start to do any more math, is to look up at the table given here. And I need to look at everything I used in my loop equation and make sure that I've converted all the tolerances given to equal bilateral tolerances. So if I look here, I have this, this, and this that all need to be converted. I don't want to have to do more work than I need to though. So if I look at the variables used in my loop equation, the only two I need to do are E and M. I don't use I here. So let's do that. Here I have 2 plus 0.1 minus 0.0. So what do I actually need to convert that to? If you remember, we take this number, we divide it by 2. I'm gonna add that to my nominal dimension, right? So this will actually become 2.05. And then I divided this by 2, that becomes my equal bilateral tolerance. Okay, and I'm gonna do the same thing with M, right? This is 21.5, but I need to convert that. Oops, sorry. 21.5, but I need to convert that. I have negative 0.3, so I need to divide that by 2, get negative 0.15. So I need to convert that, right? Subtract that from my nominal dimension. So I get 21.35. And then half of that just becomes my equal bilateral tolerance. So 21.35 plus or minus 0.15. Okay, that looks good. Now the next step here is that I need to find my mean gap value right here. So my mean gap value. How am I gonna find my mean gap value? Well, I just add up all the nominal values and see what in a perfect world would happen if I manufactured all these things without any tolerances at all. So I look at my loop equation down here, and I say, okay, my mean gap value is gonna follow this equation. So now I need to be looking at my table and my equation at the same time. So mean gap value for G1 is gonna be M, which remember I changed to be 21.35 minus, and I'm gonna combine my numbers here, E, which is 2.05, plus D, right up here, which is 5, plus C, which is 8, plus B plus A, which are 4 and 2. Okay, so my mean gap value should be 21.35 minus 2.05 plus 5 plus 8 plus 4 plus 2. And if I add all those things up, I should get a mean gap value of 0.3. Okay, so that's if everything worked perfectly. That would be my gap. Okay, but we know things don't work so perfectly usually. So we need to calculate the tolerance. All right, so that was my mean gap value. This would be my gap tolerance here. So how do I calculate my gap tolerance? For the gap tolerance, it's easy. We just take every value that was used in my loop diagram and add all those tolerances together. So if I look up here, I need the tolerance for M, which is 0.15, the tolerance for E, B, C, or E, D, C, B, and A. So I should get 0.15 plus 0.05 plus 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.07 plus 0.1. So my gap tolerance, when I add all those up, and remember, I'm not following my loop equation here, I'm just adding them all. The gap tolerance just adds. If I sum all of those, I should get 0.57. Okay? Pretty easy so far, that's step 4. Now, after I calculate my gap tolerance, and I know my mean gap value, I can find my minimum gap and my maximum gap. So all that I do for that is take the mean gap value and then add the tolerance to it and subtract the tolerance to it. And whoops, this is gonna be minus 0.3 minus 0.57. And this will be 0.3 plus 0.57. And if I do my math correctly here, this will be gap min equals negative 0.27 and gap max equals positive 0.87. Okay, so in this particular problem, we weren't given any specific range that this gap needed to be within. This is just for practice on knowing how to do all these different types of calculations, remembering to convert your equal bilateral tolerances, and knowing how to do that loop equation in the very beginning. However, if it was asked of me, hey, you need to get this gap between a certain thing, maybe like 0 to 0.5 or something like that, remember, I would start picking anything up here in my table to change. So I'd say, okay, what's manufactured in-house? How can I go and change that nominal dimension? Can I change any of these tolerances to make them much, much easier to go about changing, right? Making them smaller. And then eventually I would set my gap equal to the median between the range I was given. And I'd figure out what my tolerances were on each side, and then I can solve for the nominal value or the tolerance. But this practice here is just meant to get you in the habit, get through the steps, and make sure you understand how to calculate that minimum and maximum gap that you have. So I will leave part 2 to you, right? Part 2, same process, loop equation, mean gap value, gap tolerance, minimum gap, and maximum gap. So that wraps up our quick, super quick review of tolerance stack analysis and the example for that. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or put a comment below this video. I do check them frequently. Again, I'm Professor Casey. Thanks for joining me for this quick review number 1 for tolerance stack analysis.